Welcome to World War II Explained, a podcast by allhistoryhub.com. Clear stories, real history, and the events that shaped our world explained simply. Let's begin.
Early on a quiet Sunday morning, December 7, 1941, the calm over Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, was just shattered. I mean, it was a catastrophic attack. You're talking over 2,400 Americans killed, the U.S. Pacific Fleet crippled. It's still one of the most devastating surprise attacks in history.
And what makes it so fascinating, so chilling, really, is the paradox at its core.
Right.
This complete and overwhelming surprise happened, even though American cryptanalysts had already pulled off what many consider the greatest intelligence coup of the pre-war era.
That's it. That's what we're diving into today. This is a story about a definitive intelligence failure, but you have to start with the incredible success that came right before it.
Yes.
The U.S. knew war was coming. They were, in fact, secretly reading the enemy's most secure communications.
Yeah.
But they were, tragically, reading the wrong mail.
Exactly. Our teams had cracked Japan's highest-level diplomatic cipher. It was codenamed PERPLE.
And the intelligence from that was called magic.
Magic, yeah. And it gave Washington a direct window into high-level Japanese strategy, their frustrations, everything. But PERPLE only provided political signals. You know, the polite but increasingly hostile words. It didn't give them the blueprints for the attack. It didn't give them the swords.
So that's our mission today, to really understand that fatal gap, the one separating a huge success from an absolute catastrophe. How could they know so much diplomatically and yet be so completely blind to the operational reality?
Well, as the historian Roberta Wohlstetter put it, this was an attack presaged by a mass and variety of signals, which nonetheless achieved complete and overwhelming surprise.
And we have to figure out why those signals just didn't connect.
It's a perfect case study of what happens when the intelligence you have is so good it distracts you from the intelligence you desperately need.
Okay, so let's start with that incredible success story then, the cracking of PERPLE. Before December 7th, this really was the pinnacle of American code breaking.
Oh, absolutely, it was. So PERPLE was Japan's diplomatic machine cipher. It was the successor to their older ORID cipher.
Okay.
And it was basically this complex electromechanical device. Think of it like a scrambling machine that used rotors and a plug board to make sure every single letter was jumbled up.
And the really mind-blowing part of this, the part that sounds like it's from a movie, is that the U.S. team solved it and built a working replica without ever even seeing the original.
It's just pure engineering genius. The team, you had William Friedman, Frank Rowlett, and crucially, an engineer named Leo Rosen. They started with nothing but the intercepted Japanese messages.
Just the scrambled text.
Just the scrambled text. And Rosen, he's analyzing the patterns, and he notices something. He realizes the PERPLE machine was supposed to treat all letters the same, but it was actually treating 6 specific letters differently from all the others.
A tiny technical flaw.
A tiny flaw that became the key to the entire kingdom.
Wow.
So based only on that statistical quirk, Rosen was able to figure out the internal logic of the machine. He designed and then built an analog replica, the PERPLE analog, using off-the-shelf parts, specifically telephone stepping switches.
So once they got that working, say, around September 1940, what was the real-world value of magic?
It was unparalleled. I mean, these decrypted messages were often getting to President Roosevelt or Secretary Hull before the Japanese ambassador in D.C. had even finished decoding his own copy.
No kidding.
It was like having a minute-by-minute diary of Japan's political moves, their anger over the oil embargoes, and then finally the decision to just break off negotiations.
And it wasn't just about reading Tokyo's mail, was it? The reach was global.
That's where the value just exploded. Because the Japanese ambassador in Germany, Hiroshi Oshima, he was using PERPLE to send reports back to Tokyo about his private talks with Adolf Hitler.
So the U.S. was getting a 2-for-1.
An incredible 2-for-1. They were reading Japan's endgame with the U.S. and getting this intimate, real-time access to the strategic thinking of the Axis powers in Europe. It was an intelligence goldmine.
So if they have this strategic goldmine, this clear evidence of what Japan is thinking, why do you call it a fatal success?
Because the sheer utility of PERPLE created this deep, and you could even say logical, distraction.
I see.
You know, as the NSA history says, generals and admirals dwell in far different worlds than those who negotiate treaties. The diplomatic channel, PERPLE, it gave them the what and the why. The military channel held the where and the when.
And Washington was addicted to magic.
Completely. They wanted more and more of it, and that starved the much harder, much more critical military code-breaking effort of its resources.
Which brings us right to that military channel, the intelligence black hole, the Imperial Japanese Navy's code, JN-25.
Right. If Purple E was the polite chat between politicians, JN-25 was the top secret order book for admirals.
Yeah.
And it was designed to be, virtually impenetrable at the time.
How was it so much more complex?
Well, it was a two-part system. First, there was a massive code book, something like 27,500 different five-digit groups that stood for a word, a phrase, a location.
So 27,000 items you have to solve one by one. That's a huge task.
It's monumental. But then they made it even harder. They super encrypted this codebook using what are called additive ciphers, basically just lists of random numbers that they'd mix into the code groups.
A second layer of security.
A second constantly changing layer. So you needed both the codebook and the right list of random numbers to get anything readable. And the Japanese Navy was relentlessly disciplined about changing those additives.
They changed them right before the attack, didn't they?
They did. They changed them in August 1941, which set the codebreakers way back. And then, at the most critical moment possible, they brought in a whole new codebook and new additives on December 4th, 1941, just 3 days before the attack.
So that complexity, plus Washington's focus on Purple E, it just crippled the whole effort.
It was an institutional focus problem. I mean, imagine you're an analyst, you have this flood of purpley messages coming in that are readable now and are directly relevant to what the Secretary of State is doing. The bosses want those decrypts immediately.
Of course.
So all your time, your people, your gear, it all gets pulled away from the slow, painstaking work on JN-25.
So what was the actual result of that?
Yeah.
By late 1941, what could a team like Commander Joseph Rochefort stationed HYPO in Hawaii actually read from JN-25?
Maybe 3 or 4% of the code groups. They could pick out common phrases, things like proceed to rendezvous point or some ship names.
They're just fragments.
Barely even that. It was nowhere near enough to reconstruct a full sentence, let alone an entire operational plan. It's like trying to read a novel by only seeing every 10th word. You get a vague sense of it, but you have no idea what the plot is.
And then the Japanese military added deception on top of this encryption wall, the famous radio silence.
Yes, the deadly silence.
Yeah.
Once the Pearl Harbor Strike Force 6 carriers under Admiral Nagumo left Japan in mid-November, they went completely dark. Strict radio silence for weeks.
And U.S. analysts noticed that certain call signs had vanished, which should have been a major red flag.
It should have been. But the Japanese anticipated that. They weren't just silent, they were actively deceptive. A brilliant ruse. They had shore stations and other ships that stay behind start broadcasting dummy radio traffic, pretending to be the missing carriers. So U.S. analysts saw the usual volume of messages and just assumed the carriers were still in home waters doing routine training.
Their own expectations were used against them.
Exactly. Rochefort's team in Hawaii knew some ships were missing, but without JN-25, they had no way to find this giant, invisible fleet steaming right towards them.
Okay, so the military secret is locked down tight, but the U.S. still had the diplomatic keys. What about those major warnings that screamed, "War is days away"? Why didn't they set off the alarm in Hawaii?
Well, they absolutely should have, and they did create a lot of tension in Washington. They gave clear signs of when the attack would happen, just not where.
Let's walk through them. First, the code destruction orders.
Right. On December 6th, urgent messages go out to Japanese embassies all over the world, including Washington and Honolulu. The order: burn your cipher machines and classified documents.
That is the universal signal that war is about to start.
It's a flashing red light. It means diplomacy is over and things are about to get violent, probably within 48 hours.
Okay, that's one. What was the second?
The second was the famous 14-part message. This was Japan's final, long, hostile rejection of all U.S. terms. It was essentially a diplomatic declaration of war. And we intercepted it and translated it before the Japanese embassy staff even finished typing it up.
And the delivery time was the key part of that, right?
The timing was chilling. The message came with instructions to deliver it at exactly 1:00 p.m. Washington time. Well, analysts did the math. 1:00 p.m. in D.C. is dawn in Pearl Harbor.
The perfect time for a carrier airstrike.
The perfect time. When Roosevelt read it, he reportedly said, "This means war." The mystery is why that 1:00 p.m. marker didn't make everyone scream Hawaii.
And then there was a winds code.
Yes, this was a separate system where Japan would broadcast a coded weather phrase like east wind rain to signal that war with the U.S. was on. Now, it's a bit controversial whether the final execution message was ever actually intercepted.
But the fact that they were looking for it shows the tension level.
Exactly. Washington was on high alert, scanning the airwaves for that specific trigger.
So you have all these pieces: the diplomatic break, the burn orders, the exact time window. Why did everyone almost unanimously decide the target had to be the Philippines or Southeast Asia?
This is the absolute textbook definition of a failure of imagination and confirmation bias.
It just seemed more logical.
It seemed far more logical.
Yeah.
The Philippines was within easy reach of Japanese land-based bombers, and taking it would secure their supply lines. Hawaii, on the other hand, was over 4,000 miles away. To attack it required this massive, unprecedented gamble.
So because the Hawaii attack was so audacious, the analysts unconsciously dismissed the evidence pointing that way.
That's the tragedy of it. They filtered all the signals for when the attack was coming through their preconceived notion of where it must be. They had the right time, dawn in the Pacific, but they had already decided that had to mean Manila, not Honolulu.
And that's why the Japanese compartmentalization was so brilliant. Because all those diplomatic warnings were just noise compared to the one single message that mattered.
Absolutely. The one thing they couldn't see, hidden in JN-25, was Admiral Yamamoto's top-secret signal sent on December 2nd, the Go Code.
Nitakayama Nobor 1208.
Climb Mount Nitaka on 1208. The definitive order authorizing the attack for December 7th, Hawaii time.
And that single, untranslatable message had everything.
Everything. The target, the date, the order. It was locked in the military code, and the diplomats whose mail the Japanese knew we were reading were kept completely in the dark.
The secret was perfectly protected.
Perfectly.
And the result was total surprise. I mean, you see the pictures of the USS Shaw exploding. You read about the human toll. It's just a visceral testament to the cost of reading the wrong mail.
It was a catastrophe. But it lit a fire under the U.S. intelligence community. The shock of Pearl Harbor changed everything. Suddenly, breaking JN-25 wasn't just another job. It was the highest national security priority.
And that new focus paid off incredibly fast.
It did. The resources poured in, the bureaucracy got out of the way, and just 6 months later, by May 1942, Rochefort's team had cracked enough of JN-25 to figure out that the Japanese target designated AF was Midway Island.
The kind of specific military operational intelligence that Pericoli could never, ever provide.
Exactly. And that intelligence allowed the U.S. Navy to set a devastating ambush, win the Battle of Midway, and turn the entire tide of the war in the Pacific. It's the perfect contrast.
A failure and a triumph, both hinging entirely on cracking JN-25. And there are such profound lessons in that, right? Things that echo through modern history.
Absolutely. And it's something for you, the listener, to think about in terms of critical analysis.
I mean, the obvious modern parallel is the surprise of the 9/11 attacks.
It's an eerily similar failure of imagination. The intelligence system was, as the saying goes, blinking red. There was chatter, suspicious flight school students, but the analysts were looking for known threats, truck bombs, embassy attacks. They couldn't conceive of using airliners as precision-guided missiles against domestic targets. It was like the attack on Hawaii, just too audacious, too unthinkable.
And then you see the opposite failure just a couple of years later with the intelligence on Iraq's WMDs in 2003.
That was a case of connecting false dots. The analysts saw what they expected to see. They had a preconceived idea that Saddam had WMDs, and they used flimsy, often fabricated sources to confirm that belief. They failed to challenge their own core assumption.
Just like the analysts before Pearl Harbor failed to challenge the assumption that the attack had to be in the Philippines.
In both cases, the real danger wasn't a total lack of information. It was a deadly over-reliance on partial information and a failure to challenge your own biases about what an enemy will or won't do.
The Japanese Navy succeeded because they separated the two things perfectly.
They did. Per PLE gave us the polite goodbye. JN-25 held the battle cry. And the U.S. learned, through tragedy, that having an amazing stream of intelligence just isn't enough if the most critical information is locked away in a separate channel you're ignoring.
The tragedy spurred massive reform in U.S. intelligence, of course. Better coordination, more resources. But the most important lesson isn't structural, it's intellectual. It's about cultivating skepticism. It's about fighting the complacency that comes from having a source as good as magic.
And we really encourage you to think about that enduring lesson. To avoid these kinds of strategic blunders, you always have to be asking that critical question. What are we not seeing right now? What are the possible, even unthinkable scenarios that our current way of thinking is just dismissing out of hand?
Never be content with only reading pure PLE, when the real threat, the true blueprint, is hidden away in JN-25. That diligence, that imaginative questioning, is the only real safeguard against surprise.
You have been listening to World War II Explained, a podcast by allhistoryhub.com. Follow the podcast and join us next episode, where history becomes clear.